In the small, secluded village of Birchwood, nestled deep within the heart of an ancient forest, there was a legend that no one dared to speak of aloud. The village, with its cobblestone streets and quaint cottages, seemed peaceful enough. But beneath its serene facade lurked a dark secret, a secret tied to a forgotten well, hidden deep within the woods. The well was said to be older than the village itself, built long before anyone could remember. It was made of dark, weathered stones, and was so deep that no one had ever found its bottom. The villagers believed that the well was cursed, that it was a gateway to something sinister and ancient. Those who had ventured too close claimed they could hear whispers coming from its depths, soft, pleading voices that begged for help, or worse, cursed those who listened. The legend had faded into obscurity over the years, reduced to nothing more than a ghost story told to frighten children. But the villagers knew better. They knew the stories were true. Every so often, someone would go missing, never to be seen again. The disappearances were always the same. Someone would wander too close to the woods, drawn by an inexplicable urge, and vanish without a trace. The villagers would search for days, but they knew they would never find the person. The well had claimed them. One crisp autumn morning, a young man named Thomas arrived in Birchwood. He was a writer, looking for inspiration in the quiet solitude of the countryside. He rented a small cottage on the edge of the village near the forest, and spent his days wandering the woods, notebook in hand, searching for ideas. The villagers warned him about the forest, told him to stay away from the well, but Thomas was intrigued. He had always been drawn to the mysterious and the macabre, and the stories of the cursed well piqued his curiosity. He began to ask questions, probing the villagers for details. They refused to speak of it. The more they resisted, the more determined Thomas became to uncover the truth. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, Thomas set out into the woods. The air was cool and still, and the only sound was the crunch of leaves beneath his boots. Followed a narrow, overgrown path, guided by the vague directions he had pieced together from the villagers' warnings. As he walked deeper into the woods, the trees grew taller and thicker, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the fading light. The path became harder to follow, twisting and turning, as if trying to lead him astray. But Thomas pressed on, driven by a strange sense of purpose, an unshakable feeling that he was meant to find the well. After what felt like hours, Thomas finally reached a small clearing. In the center stood the well, just as the villagers had described. It was old and weathered, the stones covered in dark moss, and the air around it was thick with an unnatural chill. The well seemed to pulse with an almost palpable energy, as if it were alive, waiting. Thomas approached the well cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. As he neared the edge, he peered down into its depths, but the darkness was impenetrable. He listened, straining to hear the whispers the villagers had spoken of, but there was only silence. Disappointed, Thomas took out his notebook and began to sketch the well, hoping to capture some of its eerie presence. As he drew, he noticed something strange, a faint sound, barely audible, rising from the depths of the well. It was a soft, rhythmic tapping, like the sound of a stone being struck against the wall of the well. Thomas froze, his pencil hovering over the page. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, and with it came the whispers. They were faint at first, indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from all around him, but they soon coalesced into words, clear and unmistakable. "Help us, please." Thomas's breath caught in his throat. The voice was weak, filled with desperation, and it echoed in his mind, pulling at something deep within him. Without thinking, he leaned closer to the well, trying to see into the darkness. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, the voice returned, louder this time, closer. "Save us. Free us." Thomas felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The voice was no longer just a whisper. It was a plea, cry for help that stirred something primal within him. Against his better judgment, he reached out and touched the edge of the well. The stone was cold, unnaturally so, and as soon as his fingers brushed against it, the whispers intensified, filling his mind with a cacophony of voices. They were all speaking at once, overlapping and merging into a single, overwhelming chorus of despair. Thomas clutched his head, trying to block out the noise, but it was no use. The voices were inside him now, burrowing deep into his thoughts, filling him with images of darkness, of pain, endless suffering. Release us. The words were no longer a request. They were a command. Thomas felt his body move of its own accord, his hand reaching into his pocket for the flashlight he had brought. He shone the beam down into the well, the light cutting through the darkness, but it revealed nothing. The well seemed to stretch on forever, an endless void that swallowed the light. The voices persisted, urging him on, and despite the terror that gripped him, Thomas felt an overwhelming compulsion to obey. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a length of rope. He tied one end around a nearby tree and fastened the other around his waist. Taking a deep breath, he swung his legs over the edge of the well and began to lower himself down. The descent was slow and agonizing. The walls of the well were slick with moisture, and the air grew colder and more oppressive the deeper he went. The whispers surrounded him, growing louder with each passing moment, filling his mind with visions of shadowy figures, twisted and contorted in agony, trapped in the darkness. Almost there. The voice whispered, and Thomas could feel the presence of something below him, something ancient and malevolent, waiting for him in the depths. His feet finally touched solid ground, and he realized with a start that the bottom of the well was not made of stone, but of something soft and yielding. He shone his flashlight around. The beam was weak and flickering, barely illuminating his surroundings. The ground beneath him shifted, and Thomas looked down to see that he was standing on a bed of bones. Human bones, piled high and covered in a thick layer of dust. The realization hit him like a physical blow, and he staggered back, his flashlight slipping from his grasp and clattering to the ground. The light flickered and died, plunging him into complete darkness. The whispers swelled, a deafening roar that filled his mind, and Thomas fell to his knees, clutching his head in agony. The voices were no longer pleading. They were screaming, shrieking in rage and torment. Join us. Thomas felt something cold and clammy wrap around his ankle. He kicked out, trying to free himself, but the grip tightened, pulling him down. More hands, icy and skeletal, reached out from the darkness, clawing at his clothes, his skin, dragging him towards the center of the well. He tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The hands pulled him down, deeper into the pit. And as they did, the voices became clearer, more distinct. They were no longer just whispers. They were the voices of the dead, lost souls trapped in the well for eternity. Thomas struggled, but it was futile. The hands were relentless, pulling him down, down until he was submerged in the sea of bones. The cold was unbearable, seeping into his very soul, and the whispers filled his mind, drowning out all thought. Join us. As the darkness closed in around him, Thomas felt a strange sense of peace. The fear, the pain, the desperation, they all melted away, replaced by a cold, detached acceptance. He was no longer Thomas, the writer. He was one of them, another lost soul, trapped in the well for eternity. The last thing he heard before the darkness consumed him completely was the sound of his own voice, whispering in the void, joining the chorus of the damned. Help us.